We have with us tonight Phil Haney. And Phil's going to speak about, not necessarily just about his book, because we've talked about some recent occurrences, and Phil's going to, many of you have seen him on the evening news, on Fox News, heard him on Breitbart and a lot of other places. Phil Haney was one of the original founding members of the Department of Homeland Security. Before that, he was a bug guy. Now, he wasn't working for Oregon. What he was an entomologist working with the agriculture department and traveled all over the world, basically working with citrus fruits and how to prevent in foreign countries bugs and others from destroying those crops, and we had the technology on how to do that. And in the course of that, he got a lot of training, a lot of exposure, and had a Christian conversion, and then years after that began to study Arabic and began to study Islam very closely as he was in that part of the world. And if you're going to be in that part of the world, you need to speak the language. But in the course of doing that, he got within the Department of Homeland Security and began to expose groups of terrorists that were about to attack us, and subsequently did with a group called Tabligh Jamaat. You'll hear his story, but you'll also hear an update on what our government is doing to folks like Phil and to others. And it's a cautionary tale. It's one that you need to hear tonight, and I thank you all for coming tonight. We will, at the end of that, there'll be some time for Q&A. We'll have that period, and then after the Q&A, we'll have a couple of wrap-up comments. So, Phil, I'm going to turn it over to here. Please give big Texas welcome to Phil Haney.
It's really nice to be back in Texas. I really love Texas a lot, and maybe in the days ahead we'll end up being here. My wife loves it too here, especially East Texas. But my journey has started really with the Department of Homeland Security formation in March of 2003. And remember 9/11, and about a year or so after, they started discussing forming a consolidated agency to help protect the country from the threat of terrorism. That's what the original founding motto of the Department of Homeland Security. By the way, if you look in the book, in the back, there's a section of photographs of documents, and the very first one is the original founding. It's a certificate for founding members of the Department of Homeland Security, and it gives you the 25-word founding mandate, which is to protect America from terrorism and the threat of terrorism. Very simple. I wonder if we move it. Is it back or forward? We can move it.
I need to move it forward a little bit.
Maybe if we put it on that table there, it'll work. So because I was already in federal service at the time that the agency was created, I was an agricultural officer. My background is entomology, crop production, crop protection, and I traveled all over the world, with particular emphasis on the Middle East, and emphasizing studying the language and also the Quran itself and the theology of Islam. At that time, it really didn't have any market value per se, because we didn't really imagine the conflicts that were going on in places around in the Middle East would actually come to our shores, but they did. And like many of us, our life changed at that moment, and it's never really been the same since, has it? Traveling in the airport isn't the same. Remember when we used to be able to go with our whole family right up to the gate and wave goodbye, and no, none of that anymore. So everything changed, and it did for me too. And I knew that I was going to change from what I used to do, which was entomology, working in the field with farmers, to counterintelligence based on my background in the Middle East and familiarity with the Quran and so on. And that is exactly what I did. As soon as I became one of the founding members of the Department of Homeland Security, I began doing intelligence briefings. And I would send them up the chain of command, and the higher-ups would look at these reports, and in all honesty, they didn't really know quite what to do with them. But finally, they created an entire unit, and they put me in. It was called the Intelligence Review Unit. And basically what I did was I would handle the hard cases, the ones that, just didn't seem to fit conveniently in any of the boxes. And I would do analysis, and I began interviewing. By the way, how are we in the back sound-wise? Good? Okay. I like that. Texas thumb up. I have a cruise control personality. It's 50% Clark Kent and 30% Steve Martin. Humor is still legal, so we should use it while we can. But I also have 20% that's Chuck Norris. Anybody heard of Chuck Norris? And there are certain things that turn me into a Chuck Norris. Human trafficking is one of them. And terrorism is another one. Everybody that's a cop, wears a gun for a living, has got to have at least a streak of Chuck Norris in there somewhere, right? Well, I do too. So anyway, I started doing these analysis, and I sent them up the chain of command, and management wasn't really quite sure what to do. So they put me into the passenger analysis unit, we call it the PAU, and I started examining the list, we call a manifest, all the passengers, even on a domestic flight. Well, there's a list of passengers. That's how they make sure everybody gets on and gets off. But it's the same with international. But I would go through these lists, and I would compare what we call biometrics, information, family names, birthdays, etc., and see if I could find any ties to possible terrorism. And I did. It turns out I had a knack for it. Just because I was a trained entomologist, I came from a science background. And what in the world, you will ask, could a nerd, a founding member of the Nerd Society, because after all, entomologists, you all know they're nerds, right? Every characterization you've ever seen of an entomologist is this guy with big, thick glasses with a butterfly net, right? And a pen holder over here. Well, really, a good entomologist, the one that saves a farmer money, is one that has careful attention to detail and also observation of behavior, because all living things really live by behavior patterns. I also specialize in ants, because this is really true, I read Solomon's admonition. Go to, thou sluggard, and study the ant and learn her ways. I figured, well, I'm an entomologist already, I may as well take Solomon's advice. And I turned out to become a world authority in ants, and it took me all over the world, literally. All kinds of amazing places. Imagine crawling around on the ground in Brazil, collecting ants with a little aspirator that looks some sort of like a drug pipe or something, and you're sucking up ants off the ground, and I look over and there's military boots right there, and as I follow them up, it's a guy with an M16 looking down at me like, what the heck are you doing? So you get in these funny positions, and I worked in Yemen, Eritrea, China, and Japan, and South America, all over the world. And I was really good at it. I had a knack for it too. So I mentioned observation of behavior and attention to detail. I ran field trials, experiments, where we would do what are called replicated experiments, where we divide a field into, several treatments and then randomize it like a checkerboard. And in order to do that, you have to be very careful about detail. And there's another intriguing thing about this whole process of being a field scientist, is that there would always be something that I did not include in my initial criteria for evaluating the experiment so that I could do statistical analysis. Anybody here in math know what a p-value is? You live and die by p-values in research. So in order to establish it and get a good outcome, you have to have a good solid set of data. But there's always things that come up that you didn't include in your original criteria, because as an agricultural system, let's say that's been sprayed a lot conventionally, starts to stabilize, new things come up that didn't ever appear before. It's the way it is with biology. That's why you hear about species that we thought were extinct. All of a sudden we start seeing them again because we're altering pressures that are being put on the environment, and all of a sudden the environment becomes amenable for the reemergence of these particular species. And so, when I studied ants, and I combined all these qualities together, I discovered that if you simply follow the trail, what will happen? You follow the ant trail, what are you going to find eventually? The nest. See, you're going to be in my intel team. You guys really catch on quick. Follow the trail, find the nest. In other words, there's no such thing as a random ant of violence, is there? Because they always belong to a colony. And that was the major big problem I ended up having with the U.S. government, is that they insisted there was no colony. That essentially these individuals that are doing these terrorist attacks are just wandering around aimlessly in the universe with no connection to any other structure, meaning social structure. We're called lone wolves, right? Nobody knows them. Nobody ever saw them before. It was almost like they got hit by a meteor from space, and it caused them to go and attack a party on near Christmas Day, or something like that. But the fact is, within the worldview of Islam, it is absolutely terrifying to consider being separated from the community. The concept of Islam is called ummah. It means mother. The thought of being separated from the Islamic community is just as terrifying as a child is from being separated from his mother. In other words, there is no such thing as a lone wolf jihadi who nobody ever saw or knew. They are well known and they're always part of community. Like with Syed Farouk, remember him? San Bernardino. What was the initial news report? Nobody knew him. Even the Imam said, I don't know him. It was all a lie because he was very well known. The mosque that he went to, Darul al-Islamiyah, San Bernardino, he was what is called a hafiz. A hafiz is somebody who memorizes the Quran. You don't memorize the Quran and get a certificate from the University of Phoenix. You get it from the authorization of what is called the Shura Council of the mosque that you attend. Very carefully monitored. But not everybody can do that either. So he was a very prestigious individual, well known within the community, just the opposite of what it was portrayed. That's why he was able to go to Saudi Arabia and marry the daughter of a wealthy Pakistani businessman who happened to be doing his business in Saudi Arabia, because he was a man considered to be pious, with great promise for the future. And so they arranged a marriage, and he went to Saudi Arabia and married Tashfeen Malik and came back to America and settled here. But he had a colleague. His name is Enrique Marquez. How many remember Enrique Marquez? Do you know where he is right now? He's in jail. And he should be. But you know why he is in jail right now? For multiple failed plots with Syed Farouk. Wait a minute. Multiple failed plots with Syed Farouk. Syed Farouk is dead. So that means those multiple failed plots must have happened before San Bernardino attack, doesn't it? Now you start to get the picture. How in the world did they know that they were plotting terrorist attacks and never intervened? That's only one of the ways that I say, and I have said, starting with Megyn Kelly on the 10th of December 2015, that it's highly plausible that we could have prevented the attack simply because if the federal government had not deleted all the information out of the system that I put in there when I worked at the National Targeting Center on a case called the Tablighi Jamaat Initiative, which means it's a global level case, then we very plausibly would have been able to intervene. Either Syed Farouk would have been put on the no-fly list and maybe not even allowed to fly at all because of his affiliation with organizations and or individuals with known ties to terrorism, And or B, his pending fiancée, Tafshin Malik, would have never been given a visa because she was tied with individuals or organizations with known links to terrorism. Those are two other plausible ways, in addition to the fact that the FBI already knew who they were. The same thing happened with Omar Mateen. 3 other individuals that affiliated with the same mosque that he attended in Fort Pierce, Florida, had already been on the radar. One of them blew himself up as a jihad in Syria, if not Iraq. The other person had just been released from prison on weapons and fraud charges, and the third person was his own father, who was vice president of the mosque. They knew him. But FBI didn't talk to CBP, my agency. Omar Mateen went right to the port and laid his passport on the counter, and my own colleagues say to this day that they never knew that the FBI was investigating him because we don't communicate. Meanwhile, the FBI didn't know what CBP found out, Customs and Border Protection, because they weren't communicating. Both sides saw him face to face. And yet, there was a gap, a disconnect, just big enough for a person to walk through. And I mean that literally. And they never communicated with each other. The same thing happened in the Boston Marathon. Remember him? How Janet Napolitano said we didn't get a ping? You realize how demoralizing that is to have your own boss say you don't know your head from a hole in the ground? We rely on pings to tell us, electronic information that causes a ping on the system. So, oh, then you must be a terrorist because the system pinged. Well, that's like these kids nowadays that don't know how to make a $2.42 change out of a $5 bill because they're so accustomed to using a calculator, they can't add it up in their head. What are they going to do if everything breaks down? Fact is that he came back to America without a passport. He was a lawful permanent resident, supposedly a refugee from a country or an area in the Caucasian Mountains, which is the first question I would have asked him, Mr. Tashfin, what are you doing coming back from the place you're supposed to be a refugee from? And by the way, where's your passport? Because you cannot travel on a green card internationally. Green cards are a lawful permanent resident, which, by the way, they actually are green now. What are you doing coming back with no Russian passport? Because after all, his citizenship was Russian. Well, if he'd been honest, he would have said, well, my best friend from Canada got the top of his head blown off by the Russian Secret Service, so I thought it might be a good time for me to get out of there before the same thing happened to me. But none of those questions that should have been so obvious were ever asked. And he did what we call DTR down the road. And then Jenna Napolitano had the audacity to inform the American public that, well, oh well, we didn't get a ping. She didn't happen to mention that her very agency, which is my very agency, deleted all the information out of the system, and much more than that. So no wonder you wouldn't get a ping. If you're not putting information into the system, then you're certainly not going to get anything back, are you? And you might say, well, that's a bold statement. Can you prove it? I literally proved it by printing it out and putting it in my hand. 4 years before the Boston bombing, I created a case on the Islamic Society of Boston. Anybody heard of them? Islamic Society of Boston is the masjid that he went to, the Sarnea brothers. 4 years before the case, I put 118 records of a whole linked network into the system. Would you like to guess how many times any one of those records were queried in the 4-year process before the day of the Boston bombing? 0. You're right. But here's the real $64,000 question. How many times were those records queried after the bombing? 0. What does that tell you, friends? We're not even doing the most minimally adequate level of basic law enforcement. And then I found out about 2 or 3 months later why they weren't queried, because I found out that the Obama administration had chosen the Islamic Society of Boston, another mosque in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and a third one in Los Angeles, California, as model communities for the new Countering Violent Extremism program. They were not only not investigating them, they were conducting outreach programs with the very same mosque that I had put all these records into this system and had links to Hamas, Al-Qaeda, terrorist financing, and about 40 different individuals with known derogatory information. Now you tell me, friends, how in the world can you say that we were being protected by our administration when you have more than 100 records linked to that particular mosque with high-level derogatory, right up to the highest levels of known links to terrorism, and not one single one of those records was queried in the 4-year period before the Boston Marathon happened. So I printed one out, and I said, look guys, I actually took it around to my friends and said, look at this. And they all said the same thing. Wow, Haney. Wow. But that was a moment, friends, because 4 days later, my boss, Janet Napolitano, sat before the House Committee on Homeland Security and talked to Jeff Duncan. And maybe some of you remember seeing it. Jeff Duncan asked Secretary Napolitano, we hear there's a Saudi individual that might have been involved with the Boston bombing. You have to keep in mind, friends, that at that moment on Thursday afternoon, the 18th of April, we still didn't know about the Sardina brothers. The only person that had any possible link to the case was Abdul Rahman al-Harbi. Janet Napolitano says there was no Saudi individual who was ever a subject of interest, or who was ever a suspect, or who was ever intended to be deported on terrorism charges. Your question is so full of misapprehension and misunderstanding that it's not even worth an answer. And she just blatantly refused to answer Jeff Duncan, Vice Chairman of the House Committee, question about this individual who had been tackled at the site, sent to the hospital, interviewed by the FBI, had his apartment searched, brought the information back about midnight, and then contacted the NTC and told them we're going to create an event called a targeting framework event. It's a fill-in-the-blank template intelligence report, and deport him on terrorism charges. So how do I know all that stuff? Well, guess what my job was at the National Targeting Center? Filling in targeting frameworks. Nobody does a TF, a targeting framework, where all this information I just referred to was consolidated. It's not Burger King. We don't do it our way. We have to be asked to do it. They call in from a port or from NCTC or some other federal law enforcement agency and say, please open a report on XYZ person, and we go to work and we fill in all the blanks, and then we send that product over to the Secret Squirrel Department, the high classified level, and they run it through their system, and we decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. In this case, we're going to deport him on 3B charges, which is another acronym for terrorist-related charges. So then comes the Janet Napolitano insisting none of that ever happened, but there was one large fly in the ointment. Can you guess who the large fly was? Remember, I'm an entomologist. By the way, I found a tick on the back of my head about 5 minutes ago. You know, welcome to Texas, right? So, where'd this critter come from? Anyhow, I was the large fly in the ointment because the committee already knew before they asked her that this is the facts of the case. And then that information that I had provided on request by the committee, which a federal law enforcement officer is not only allowed to but obligated to do, was leaked out of the committee and went on Glenn Beck and also Brett Baer on Fox. And they literally held it up to the camera and said, see, the guy really was going to be deported. And guess who got in trouble because that information got leaked? Me. My own committee threw me under the bus. I'm talking about the House Committee on Homeland Security. Somebody from your own state is chairman of that committee and told me to my face that we were going to protect you and we're going to protect your information, Mr. Haney, and then turned around and didn't do it. Not only did they not do it, they let me go through another 2.5 or 3 years of investigation, including a grand jury convened by the Department of Justice to find probable cause to indict me on criminal charges. And nobody from the committee, not only did they not follow up with Janet Napolitano's open lie, they never intervened to help me, even though they knew that I was the one that provided them the information, and somehow, like a little bird, it got leaked out of their committee. This is what it's like to be a whistleblower, friends. The Bible verse says, my own familiar friend lifted up his heel against me. In modern language, that means they kicked me. When you lift up your heel, it means you kick somebody. So, all this is still going on, by the way. None of it has actually been resolved yet. Everything that I write about in the book, by the way, isn't about me. I was there, I saw it, I wrote about it, but it's not my story. The story is our story. It's a story of America. It's also a harbinger. It's a warning. And I'll make a declarative statement. A declarative statement is a statement based on fact that you can prove. I'm saying it in public. It's a declarative statement that unless we find the courage and the wherewithal to address the policies and decisions, the directives that were signed by members of the administration that led to the deletion of this information out of the system, which then led subsequently to the San Bernardino and the Orlando shootings, it is inevitable, like solving the mathematical equation, that we will have more of these kind of attacks in the future. Because our inability to have the courage to resolve this means that we're essentially blinded. And if you got a large pterodactyl or a Tyrannosaurus Rex over there, and you're blind in one eye, then doesn't that increase your chances that the T-Rex is going to come and get you? Right. We need our full abilities. So, my point is if we don't find a way to resolve this in the days, weeks, and months ahead, then we're going to have the same kind of things happen over. I'm telling you now, in public, here in Texas, that that's what will happen. Now, will we ever be able to necessarily stop all attacks? Probably not. But that's a lot different than abrogating the responsibility you've been given when you take an oath to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic. No one will fault law enforcement if they're doing their utmost, will we? Will any of us fault law enforcement if we really know, same with the military, that they're doing all that they can do? Will we? But we will fault them if we find out that they haven't been doing all they should be doing, won't we? And that's where I'm at right now, friends. I'm retired from federal law enforcement, but I took a vow to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic. And even though I'm not currently active duty, my vow still is. And I am obligated by the fact that I have now discovered more information related to my story, to the case, through the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, plus directives that new Secretary of Kelly has signed, plus breaking news virtually every day in the headlines that prove my story. I was right. I don't overstate, I don't exaggerate, and I don't lie. I just plainly say, this is what happened. And that's why I survived being investigated 9 times. 9, underline, emphasize, bold, 9 times by my own administration, my own colleagues, for simply doing what I took the vow to do. It wasn't for moral infractions, failures to disobey order, or failures to follow orders, or any of the other things us guy types tend to usually get in trouble for, and you know what those are. Too much of this, or other things. It wasn't that. It was simply that I put information into the system that they didn't want me to put in. And so there's 3 levels of response in a case like this. The first one was what they tried initially, and I say they, I mean the Obama administration, was to ignore the information completely. Haven't you seen that approach played out in different ways? It didn't happen. It didn't exist. Benghazi, great example of it. First they denied it, they just tried to ignore it. But in the case with the records, like people like myself put in, that didn't work because the records were too good. In other words, they were leading to law enforcement actions being taken on these individuals, several of whom happen to have been in the administration, which isn't very good on the resume when you've got known affiliates of terrorism working inside the executive branch of the government, does it? And or you have these same organizations meet at least 150 times in the executive, meaning the White House, during the course of the Obama administration. CARE, Islamic Society of North America, Muslim Public Affairs Council, Muslim Students Association, all of them. By the way, they were proven in federal court right in Dallas in 2008 to be known connections to Hamas, right? Remember the Holy Land trial? That was 10 years ago now, coming up on. They knew. There's no possible way that you could say you didn't know that these individuals in these groups, organizations, had known ties to Hamas. But rather than going after them in a law enforcement way, the Obama administration chose to do exactly the opposite and brought them into positions of influence and authority, not only in domestic counterterrorism policy, which morphed into what we now know as countering violent extremism, see something, say something, but also in the foreign arena, where we allied with the Muslim Brotherhood and backed them in the Al-Arab, Al-Arabiya, the Arab Spring, and destabilized the entire Middle East, including ISIS. How did ISIS come about? Has anybody ever read the DIA declassified report on how ISIS came about? It was through Benghazi. They were shipping weapons from Benghazi in small ships to small ports on the coast of Syria. That was A. Then they were arming Jabhat al-Nusra, which means the Victory Front, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda of Iraq with these very same weapons. And number 3, they encouraged him to take eastern Syria as a buffer between Assad and the Iranian regime. And once they did that, what do you suppose these thoroughly vetted moderates did when they looked over the border into Iraq and saw the back door of the country wide open, i.e. Fallujah? They took it. And they morphed into what we now call ISIS. They recreated a Frankenstein in Syria and it escaped from the laboratory. There's another one over there in Afghanistan, another Frankenstein that escaped from the laboratory too. It is called what? The Taliban. The Taliban are students. That's what the word means, by the way, friends. Talib is a student. It's the same word as the tulip. Because in the old days, remember that, anybody ever read about the speculative market on tulips that made some people in Holland multi-billionaires? Well, tulip is a derivative of the word for talib, which actually means the turban that these guys would wear because they were studying Islam and Quran, and they were called talibs. Taliban in Pashtun Urdu is plural, students. So what are they students of? That's the natural question, right? What are the Taliban students of? The Tablighi Jamaat movement of Islam, the very one I was studying at the National Targeting Center, which case was then shut down by the Obama administration and led directly to the San Bernardino shooting. And Orlando. What would you do if you were in my position, friends? when you took a vow, what would you do? When you're literally holding information in your hand while your own boss, meaning Napolitano, is lying before Congress. And you're holding it in your hand. What would you do?
Leak it.
I didn't have to. I gave it to Congress. They leaked it. No, not leak it. See, I'm not a Snowden, nor am I a Chelsea Manning, nor am I a WikiLeaker. I never violated the chain of command the whole time I was active duty. I always followed the chain of command. What was my chain of command, friends? First, it was my immediate supervisor, then the chief, then the assistant port director, then the port director, then the DFO, and then headquarters, and then after that, is there anything left after that? Congress. And that's what I did. I went to Congress 55 times and counting, and laid all this information on the table in front of them. Here it is on a golden platter. I will give it to you. Please take it, but you have to ask me for it. You have to ask me for it. And they look at me like I was speaking Swahili. They seem incapable of responding to a real-life person, active duty law enforcement, standing right in front of them, saying, here it is right here. They know. History is a fearsome woman, friends. If she fastens her eye on you, and you are found on the wrong side of history, she will turn you into a stone. If you want an illustration, who is this from World War II? Neville Chamberlain. And how do we always think of him? With that paper in his hand saying we're going to have peace in our time. Neville Chamberlain is frozen like a stone in time. Why? Because he was so spectacularly wrong that history will never forgive him for it. You met face to face, and you really allowed yourself to be persuaded that this hideous tyrant called Hitler was really going to make peace with you? Now we're looking at the same kind of a time in history. When we look back years from now, we're going to be seeing people that will be frozen in time by history. Because when she fastens her eye on you, if you're on the wrong side, there will come a time, friends, when she will turn you into a stone. However, if you're on the right side of history, you will live forever. Because whenever you stand up for what is right, as it says in the Bible, you will shine like stars in the firmament. There is a lot of people in positions of authority that are in perilous danger of being turned into stone right now. And my wish would be that rather than waiting for the federal government to take action and help address some of the natures of the threats that we face, would take to heart the kind of system that our country was founded on, which is of, for, and by the people. Because no matter how well organized and how effective and efficient the federal government might be, even at its most optimal possible level, it can only reach so far. I can't reach out to you. But you can form a human chain and you could actually come to me. And that's how the system works. It is your ultimate responsibility, and I say you in the capital U, the collective, to take action at the point where you find yourself right now. Each one of you can operate in one of three major arenas. Either the social arena, which the flashpoint for that is going to be, or is already, immigration reform. Right? Why are we told that we need immigration so badly? So that we'll be more diverse in inclusion. It's a social political experiment. Or the political arena. Maybe you're not interested in that. How about the political arena? And there's going to be a flashpoint with that. It's in works right now. And the indicator of that, the canary in the coal mine, is our sovereign relationship with Israel, our best ally in the world. The entire world is telling us that we don't have a right to establish an embassy in Jerusalem because if we do it, we're going to suffer severe consequences. They are telling us we do not have the right to establish sovereign relationships with another country. as we see fit. And we're letting them do it. And the third arena is law enforcement. And the flashpoint for that one, law enforcement - military, is the designation of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, which should have been done a long time ago. It to me is an obscenity that groups like CARE can come to meetings like this and almost in some cases do shut them down. When we know that they're affiliated with Hamas, what the heck is wrong with us? It's because we've lost our way, because we've forgotten what our country is founded on, which is the principles of the Constitution. It is stronger than any wall that we could possibly build, simply because according to Article 6 of the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land, and all judges of every state shall abide thereby. If you have a competing ideology or law called Sharia that states itself, its own self-definition, is that it's superior to all man-made forms of law, including the U.S. Constitution, then there is your point of conflict right there, your point of contact. It's not a First Amendment issue. It's not about freedom of expression and worship. It's about two competing forms of law. And that is why our founding fathers created Article 6, because they foresaw that there might actually come a time down the road when we'd be arguing about what form of government that we want to live under. So they said, we'll just dispense with the ceremony. It's the U.S. Constitution. But we have progressive leftists who are shouting about down with the wall and this is not our president and resist. And we have their allies, what I call the Green Dragon, the pro-Sharia global Islamic movement, who are seeking to do exactly what it says in the Declaration of Independence, to alter or abolish this current form of government and replace it with one that is more suitable to their ends and means. That's what they're doing, isn't it? So, each one of us here has a destiny. You're not responsible for what your neighbor does. That doesn't mean you can't work together. Ultimately, each one of us is responsible for fulfilling the responsibilities, the callings, and the destiny that we ourselves have been called to do. And that's what the Bible means when it says, having done all, to stand. We have forgotten who we are. We need a revival, and I don't just mean a revival like in the fellowship here. We need a constitutional, secular, political revival as well. Because if you are a person of faith, there's no harm in supporting the Constitution, because after all, the Constitution is saturated with biblical values. So you've got a twofer here. And you can ally with somebody who has no belief in God whatsoever, who just happens to be a passionate defender of the Constitution with no problem whatsoever. You can argue theology later, because if he or her is supporting the Constitution, even if they insist they're an atheist, they're still supporting the biblical principles that are saturated, embedded within the Constitution. That's why we made a big mistake when we argued about whether Romney should be voted for because he was a Mormon. Rather than realizing that the real basis of the choice, which thank God we made this time, was who is more likely, and I did not say who is more perfect. I said who is more likely to stand up and defend the values of the Constitution. Was it Donald Trump or was it Hillary Clinton? I believe we made the right choice. Thank God for that, because if she had been elected, these kind of meetings would have very likely become illegal. And they would have encouraged the people to come bursting through those doors at any given minute and shout people like myself down and create anarchy and chaos, because they would have been backed up by the administration, who is going to go through every possible link to shut down any opposition to their agenda and program. It was all in place, friends. They had it wired solid. You knew how I knew something was going sideways? Because I said, I had a joke, I said I left my DNA, my media DNA, all over the country. I said 100, if not 1,000 times, Donald Trump was going to win the presidency. Because I had the great honor of traveling around the country and seeing something that very few people had the opportunity to see. And that was the spark of hope that ignited in people's eyes across the country. Normally, I don't stand this far away from the group. I'm usually down there. Actually, I don't know why I'm down there. I'm just up here. The point is, I was close enough to see the spark of hope ignite in people's eyes, like watching something being born. And after all the travail that I went through watching these policies emerge up at my feet like newly planted corn, problems with immigration and problems with counterterrorism, to have the opportunity and the honor to go around the country and talk to groups in the small towns, Corn Cob, Nebraska, and everywhere in between, Tumbleweed, Texas, to see that spark of hope ignite in people's eyes. And I knew he was going to win because I saw something that the mainstream media was not seeing. And I said it. Thank the Lord I was right. It wasn't just my hopeful imagination. I really was seeing it. What a great honor that was. I got to participate in history. It's kind of a nice balance between what I went through and what I got to see, have seen subsequently. But all the election did, friends, is one simple thing. It just defined the battlefield. That's all we gained by this. Now the question is, are you ready to go on to the battlefield, or are you going to hang on the edges like they did during the early part of the Civil War, when people actually went out with Sunday bonnets on and watched battles in Gettysburg or places like that? And then pretty soon things got real serious, and people began to be forced into positions where they had to make choices about what they really believed. As I said earlier, I'm a harbinger. I'm telling you what those people were capable of because I saw them up close and personal. And I paid a great price. I'm a steward and a guardian of this story. It's not my story, I mentioned that. It's our story. But I paid a great price for it. But I don't want to shipwreck myself and sabotage everything that's gone on. So my job is to maintain my own personal integrity in the meantime, which is also ours as well. Am I making sense tonight? I'm not, you're noticing I'm not even going off the PowerPoint. But I have a magic mouse here. So let's see if the magic mouse works. It does. Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? That's the motto of this new organization. How do you like that swamp? It's even got a couple of dragonflies in there, so entomology is represented there. Now, this is a really remarkable picture. This illustrates a thing I call first level analysis. What do you see in that picture? What's that big thing in the back? It's called a Khamsin. It's a raging inferno of a sandstorm that buries things up to the gills. What are those people that are walking around doing?
Taking pictures.
Those are Kurds, by the way. It's the city of Raqqa. They're our allies. But what is their attention distracted by? This big coming storm. Meanwhile, what are those things all over the ground? They're all over the place. What are those things? Did the Martians zap them with death rays? No, they're burqas. The people were evacuating out of the city, and as soon as they got out of the city limits, they dropped their cover and turned into another person. Who were those people? And this is a remarkable picture because it illustrates the abstract, if you will, the existential nature of the threat we face. There's a huge storm on the horizon, friends. Is it fear-mongering for me to say that there's a huge storm on the horizon, friends? Or wouldn't you rather know when there's a twister coming? At least you try to prepare yourself. But what if the U.S. government knew it and didn't tell you for whatever X, Y, and Z reasons? How would you feel afterward if they knew it and they didn't tell you? And who are these people that used to be inside those burqas? Some of them are going to end up here and other places. And that is a perfect illustration of the nature of the threat we face. These people morph from one shape to the next like caterpillars into butterflies. They're becoming, nobody knows who any of those people were. There are valves that are open that should be closed, and valves that are closed that should be open. The ones that are open, they're called leaks. Remember the first few weeks, it was nothing but leaks, leaks, leaks. Now it's nothing but Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia is a valve that is open that should be closed, and the leaks are valves that were closed, or whichever. I got it backwards. You get the point, right? So everything's upside down and backwards, and I keep saying, redeputize me, Mr. Trump. I know where the valves are, and I can help you close them. I really do know where they are. And I'm going to show you a couple of them in a minute or two. We have a government, I've covered this already, so the changes must come from those who are working at the grassroots level. I can't tell you how many times people ask me, what can we do, Mr. Haney? What can we do? Everything. You guys have the opportunity, the ball's in your court. This is a time for us to stand up. You think, if you're a believer, that the Lord invested so much in us to bring us to the point where we're in our 60s, plus or minus, for nothing? You're not too old. You have the wisdom. I have a saying, youth is the price of wisdom. You have to pay for wisdom with your youth. Well, why don't we use it? What's wisdom? Okay, I'll give you an example. If you never opened the Quran in your life, there are 3 things that you should know about what the Quran teaches that will make you immovable in any argument. First is, the Quran teaches that Jesus was not crucified. N-O-T, underline, not crucified. That comes to the heart of the basic understanding of who we are as believers in the New Testament, doesn't it? Of the everlasting covenant. The second one is that Christ Jesus was not the Son of God. Emphatically stated in chapter 5. And that those who say he is are guilty of blasphemy. It's a capital offense. That's why they kill Christians in the Middle East. That's why I have this on. And that's why our friend sells those shirts with the N. It's a symbol of the persecuted church in the Middle East. They're being killed now for believing that Jesus is the Son of God and that he was crucified. Nothing so wildly esoteric. It's that fundamental New Testament theology is what they're being killed for. The third thing is that Muhammad is the comforter that Jesus promised in chapter 14 and 16. The one who would come and walk beside us and not leave us, who would lead us and guide us into all truth and show us things to come. That's Muhammad, according to Islam. That's chapter 6. Wouldn't you agree if you didn't know anything but those 3 major points that you'd be able to stand your ground in any kind of argument? Because whenever they're having interfaith dialogue anywhere in the country, if you avoid talking about those 3 major theological points, you're not having dialogue, friends. You're having a monologue. And it's a one-way conversation determined by defined by the other side, not by us. You bring those 3 doctrines up, you're going to have one of 2 things happen. A confrontation or a conversion. Period. If you don't believe me, try it. Next time you have an opportunity, ask somebody that's representing Islam, what about the crucifixion, sir? And watch what happens. Now, if you want to get down to the real bone of things, you will see it. The rest of it is just smoke and mirrors. Because if you can't resolve those 3 fundamental concepts, then if they're right, then we, according to the Bible, are of all men most miserable. We really are stupid fools. Because what we believe is not true. However, if it is true, and it is true, then we should be bolder and more confident and competent in our conversations going forward. You don't have to know the subtleties and intricacies of Islamic theology and Sharia law if only you know those 3 things. And if you're not wanting to exercise in the arena of faith, then go over on the Constitution side and talk about Article 6. Sir, the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the judges of each state are bound to abide thereby. Doesn't Sharia say that it's superior to all man-made forms of law, then how do you reconcile that disconnect? They will not be able to answer you. But they're also not accustomed to being confronted so directly with what he referred to, the simple truth. The rest of it is subjective nonsense. And that's the arena we've been operating for far too long. That's why groups like CARE continue to have influence in our social, political, and law enforcement arena. It's because we don't know how to confront them effectively. We're like Elmer Fudd shooting at the Wascally Wabbit, blasting away but never hitting anything. That's a little bit of an overstatement, but not really much. And I've kind of covered this already. These truths are self-evident to who? Who are they self-evident to? This assumes a biblical worldview, doesn't it? But in order to secure the rights that we've been endowed with, it is incumbent upon us to be citizens of the country that we live in and participate in the process. Oops. Civil War, do you believe we're in one? I don't call it a war, I call it a saturation. We talked about this earlier. If I say infiltration, I think in most cases it's kind of like getting a shot of Novocaine right in the head. These words have lost their meaning to us. We hear them so many times. It's called attenuation in science. Try it. If you smell a rose about 10 or 15 times, you won't be able to smell it at all. It's called attenuation. These words are thrown out there and thrown at us so often that we've lost comprehension of what they mean. So I call it saturation. Nobody has patented that word yet. Think of a big giant sponge floating on some water. What's the natural process going to be when that sponge is floating on the water? What's going to happen? The water is going to absorb into the sponge, right? Well, what if you're a jihadi and you're tired of waiting for that slower process? What are you going to do? You're going to push on the sponge from above. That's another tactic in order to accomplish the overall goal, which is saturate that sponge with water, which the water is Sharia law in this case. So how do you protect that sponge from being saturated with water when you don't have the option of taking the sponge out of the water, because the water is where we live. It's our world. We can't remove ourselves from it. So how do we protect ourselves from it? You put spray guard on the sponge. And what is that?
Truth.
That and the Constitution. Our Constitution is more powerful than any border wall that we could ever build if we would simply abide by the provisions of the Constitution. But look what happened when President Trump issued the executive order. No one ever addressed 18 U.S.C. 1132 or 8 U.S.C. 1132 that the law was based on. Not one single judge is abiding by the provisions of the Constitution as per Article 6. They're basing their decisions on subjective political points of view. They're abrogating their constitutional duty. They're traitors. Border protection now has been called racism. Observing the law is called discrimination. Threat awareness is called fear-mongering. These are the same terms that people like CARE or progressive leftists will accuse us of hate speech, fear-mongering, discrimination, and racism. I noticed when I was traveling around before the election that there were three major reasons why people were upset. One is that it's an upsetting topic. Is what I talked to you about even gone up 1 or 2 or 3 degrees on the upset-ometer? Yeah, it has, hasn't it? You're upset, aren't you? By at least one thing that I've said so far. I can't see this thing, so I keep backing into it. And I'm not done yet. You're going to be really upset before I'm done. And so they're upset because it is an upsetting topic. Number two reason is no one told us about this. How come it is that some of the most basic things that we're talking about, and we're all 17 years down the road from 9/11, and the average person still doesn't know any of it? How could that possibly be? And the third reason is, what about DHS? Weren't they created, formed, to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic? Wasn't that the case? Point? So how come they're not doing it? How come Janet Napolitano says we didn't get a ping? How come Jay Johnson testifies before Ted Cruz's Judiciary Committee, and when he specifically asked him, what about Mr. Haney's claims about deleting the records, have you taken time to look into it? He says, I don't know, Mr. Haney, if you would walk into the same room. And no, I haven't taken time to look into it. Wait a minute, you're the Secretary of Homeland Security. What I'm saying is a national security issue. I'm telling the world, the American public and Congress, that the Department of Homeland Security deleted intelligence records out of the system. And the best thing you can say is that, no, you haven't even taken the time to look into it. If you were really a good secretary, you'd do one of two things. You'd either tell your guys to look into it and shut that guy up once and for all, or you would find out that he's actually telling the truth. And maybe you'd give him a call and say, Mr. Haney, maybe you can come and help us upgrade our counterterrorism measures. But no, he had the hubris and the audacity to look right at Ted Cruz and say, nah, I haven't taken the time to look into it. Well, would you be concerned if they were true, his claims? No, I wouldn't. It's an interesting political discussion, but it's really about semantics and labels. You tell that to the people in San Bernardino and Orlando and Boston, that it's just semantics and labels. It's what I call obscene hubris, arrogance. And those are the kind of people that are in danger of being turned into stone. We already talked about these three arenas: social, political, and law enforcement. Pick one, whichever one you're drawn to or you feel most competent in, and begin to work out, reach out and network. This is Janet Napolitano. She's inflicting herself on the University of California, and I say inflict because she ordered her own professionals, law enforcement, not to cooperate with the federal government in terms of immigration support and enforcement of immigration law. She is forcing them to violate their vow, which is exactly what she did with us. How in the world did a person like that get a position as Chancellor of the University of California? She knows better. And what Sessions and Tillerson and Trump should do is go out there and serve her with an injunction order and tell her, you either comply with federal immigration law or we'll lock you up. Period. How do you like them apples, Janet Napolitano? And this is CARE, I mentioned it before, complaining about the executive order, calling it a Muslim ban, when it's nothing of the such. You know why the original 7 and then the subsequent 6 countries were chosen? Because except for Iran, none of them have a functioning government. They're total chaos, violence, and anarchy. We're really expected to trust biometric information, meaning birth dates, names, and so on, places of birth, from countries that don't even have archives? And you're telling us that's racist and discriminatory? And that is one of those intrusions into this arena that should be prohibited. And here's al-Sadr telling us if we move our embassy to Jerusalem that we're going to suffer severe consequences. And this just came out today. Now our own government is telling President Trump he better not move the embassy to Jerusalem for all their same reasons that have solved absolutely nothing up to now in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Remember I told you that it was going to be a flashpoint in the political arena? Well, there it is in black and white right now. Now I'll give you a homework assignment. Watch and see how this story unfolds in the next few days, weeks, and months. I just have some other examples of these saturations into the 3 arenas that are current, happening right now. By the way, you can have the PowerPoint. And then all the links to all the information that I'm showing you is down in the notes section of each slide, and you can walk yourself back through it.
We'll put it in the next newsletter so you can download it.
So what is that date? Remember, 22nd of December 2015. Does anybody recall the date of the San Bernardino shootings? It was the 2nd. So 3 weeks later, CARE and ACLU sue the FBI for unwarranted intrusion and surveillance of the community there. This is what I said, remember obscene hubris? The fact that these individuals who are known to ties to Hamas would even have the right to do this at all is an obscenity. They do not want law enforcement looking into these things. So here's CARE again. Here's our erstwhile Director Comey being accused of stonewalling investigations. Then we find out that President Obama policy on CVE, there's no way to evaluate how effective it is. The whole thing was a colossal fiasco. But yet that's what shut down law enforcement in DHS, in FBI, in DOD, Border Patrol, ICE, CBP, all of it was this program that now they've discovered had no benefit whatsoever. And here's the surveillance. We found out that he, just days before left office, did a basically retroactive CYA executive order authorizing all the intelligence agencies to share intel information, which means they were already doing it. He just covered the bases. So we'll fly through real fast. These two letters and the next one are results of FOIA requests. The dates are current. They're signed by active duty individuals in the current administration. The bottom line is, friend, they're saying that the Tablighi Jamaat case that I worked on at NTC never existed. We've come to another crisis point. This has to be resolved. Would you agree? This is the best we can expect from the federal government and all the investment that we've made through the FOIA process as well, that the only thing they can say is that the case never existed. Well, of course it existed. I worked on it. The letter proving existence is in the back of the book. They couldn't even find that. And then here's another one I bet you didn't know about in the Federal Register dated February 15, 2014. J. Johnson signed a provision allowing members of known terrorist organizations to get visas to come into the country because it's part of their cultural involvement with Islam. Did you know that? Remember, the Congress makes rules, and then there's this thing called the executive orders, and then there were these things called directives that's signed by secretaries. They went way past that. They dispensed with all of that. They put it in the Federal Register. Drop it in literally in the middle of the night and change immigration law with absolutely no input whatsoever from Congress. There's a swamp right there. You're looking at it. And this is just another letter from new Secretary Kelly saying that they're going to bring the Privacy Right Act into alignment with existing law. Hold your breath for a minute. This proves that I was investigated illegally. Because if they have to bring Privacy Right Acts into alignment with existing law, and the DOJ investigated me for violating privacy right of foreign nationals, it means they did it to me illegally. And they also deleted the information out of the system on the same basis, which means they deleted the information out of the law enforcement database illegally. That's where we are right now, friends. I haven't even put this together. I'm going to give it to Congress, but it's also going to go public, because the amazing thing is, it's all public information. It's not even classified. And here's the executive order. I already went over this. This is the law, 8 U.S.C. 1182. Look how plain it is. The president, for any reason, at any time, can prevent people from coming into the country if it serves a national security need. Simple. It's not complicated. And I'm going to just go through this. It talks about Obama. We're talking about the swamp. See the top picture? While the boss was talking to President Trump a week or so ago, I was in Beit Shala. I was in the West Bank a week ago. Literally. And I took pictures right here. The top one is memorials to shaheeds. They're obviously fresh, they're not defaced. The symbol is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It's a known terrorist organization in Beit Jala, next to Bethlehem, the West Bank, Abbas's territory. While he's telling President Trump, we raise our children in peace, they have this stuff. I walked around with my own camera and took pictures of it. And down here, you see the little boat and the symbol of Israel with a crescent and a cross. And down below in the Arabic writing, it says, Sana'ud, we will return. 1948. That's what their intention is. There's no two-state solution, friends. There's more. This is Fatah, honoring 12 different martyrs. And the very same day that Abbas said, we're raising our children in peace. Fatah, which means to open, i.e. open the land of Israel for the Palestinians, commemorates these 12 murderers. 35, 40, 50-year, 50 multiple life terms these guys have. And there is what they're trying to destroy. That's Tel Aviv, taken from the plane of a 787 on our way back on May 4th. I guess it's 2 weeks now. These are the things I saw when I was over there. It's very surreal to be there standing on the ground and while I'm watching press conferences coming from back home when Mahmoud Abbas is openly lying, just like Janet Napolitano did before Congress. So I take pictures of this stuff. This is intelligence. This is the Golgotha. Anybody been there and seen the garden tomb? Well, what you might not realize is that above here is what that says right there. And that says, Maqbara al-Mujahideen al-Muslimun, the graveyard of the Mujahideen, the jihad fighters. Why did they put it right on top of one of the most well-known symbols in the Christian world? Because they don't believe that Jesus was crucified. So they're making an open declaration of the supremacy of Islam for the whole world to see it. And they basically consider all those people that are in that British garden that's right over here to the left to be complete fools. Honoring and commemorating an event, according to them, never existed or never happened in the first place. Oh, we're going to talk about Muslim Brotherhood designation. We're about out of time. And again, you can review it. They're campaigning Congress right now to prevent them from doing it. And now we just got another guy who is very pro-Hamas put on the National Security Council. This is right. 2 or 3 days ago. The swamp is still alive and well, or seething and frothing. Conclusion? This book is called The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. The struggle of man against power is a struggle of memory against forgetting. But in order for this principle to really work, we have to know and believe that something really happened in the first place. In other words, the Constitution isn't real. Are we willing to stand up for it, having done all to stand? And my favorite quote from President Lincoln, that the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. Like that storm I showed you in the beginning. The occasion is piled high with difficulties, but we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew, and we must act anew. We must all disenthrall ourselves. Then we shall save our country, the last best hope on earth. We need more statesmen like this, wouldn't you agree? Any questions?
If you have questions, please come down to the microphone. We'll start the pass around. Roger might go ahead and get the plates back there and start passing them around. If you have questions, no dissertations or comments, but just a straight up question if we could. That way we won't bore everybody.
Roy, that mic's not on. You'll have to, or just hand him that one. Yeah.
My question is, we talked earlier, and was that just as the Nazis destroyed the Stalag, so that they could have another one, destroy the existing government, the buildings and everything it stood for. That's the attempt to be done here in the United States too, isn't it? It seems like everything is orchestrated, at least during the Obama administration, and was to continue with Hillary. You agree with that, sir?
Yes. I never did finish my point about what I knew. Remember when they kept emphasizing the stock market? during the electoral college tallies, how the drop numbers were dropping. Why were they dropping? Because the people that had made deals with Hillary Clinton began to realize that something was going sideways as fast as they could get out. The vultures were circling around America, and they were going to land and devour us, and she would have helped them do it. But then they all flew away like a big flock of pigeons when they began to realize that it wasn't going the way they were reassured that it would go. That's when I really knew, because these people at this level knew very well that things were not going the way they expected them to. That was my first indicator that he's going to really win it. I was in Nebraska, Omaha. Nice place to be. Next, please.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation, for educating us. You mentioned earlier that you respected the chain of command and you followed that all the way through. Before you went to Congress, did you go to the Office of Special Counsel in Washington? And if so, how did they respond?
You want to get stuck in the tar, baby, try going to the OSC. Nobody recommended I go to them, even the ones that treated me badly. It's an open secret. If I get redeputized and I have an opportunity, one of the things I would like to do is help Congress create a safe, clear pathway for people who you might want to call whistleblower, which, by the way, do you know who defines a whistleblower? Your own agency. They have to designate you as one. How likely is that going to be?
Never.
Congress can use the term. I never call myself that, really. Only the fact that Congress calls me that. But your own agency technically is supposed to do it. But as far as the OSC, yikes.
Just a follow-up question on what you just mentioned. Do you see any issue being taken in Washington right now to set up some type of a task force or an action committee to prevent, what you went through from happening again to future potential whistleblowers?
Not really at this moment. There's 3 oversight committees, just so you know. Jason Chaffetz, Chuck Grassley, and Mark Meadows. Mark is distracted right now by the healthcare thing. Grassley's doing a pretty good job. I'm not really quite sure about Jason. I've heard some rumors he may not be around much longer, though I'm not sure, but
He's not running for re-election.
well, at least that. So he's a, what do you call it, lame duck at this point. But there are 3 oversight committees. That would be the natural, again, referring to the chain of command, that would have to be the starting point. So if you can't get them to move, no other committee can be involved because it's superseding authority. I've talked to other members of Congress, including Mr. Gomer, but he doesn't have a gavel for a committee and he can't supersede any of the 3 oversight committees. So there you go, it's like frozen in ice.
Thanks.
Next.
Has Judicial Watch been involved in any of this?
Yes, they're the ones that FOIA'd the documents that I showed you. And if it weren't for them, none of these basic, the IRS or the Fast and Furious, none of them would have ever seen the light of day. Yeah, Judicial Watch and me are close buddies. By the way, you realize that's an optical illusion, right? Those lines really aren't curved. So what's the point of showing you an optical illusion? Don't get fooled by your senses. Don't be misled by efforts to, mix you up and confuse you. If you take a ruler on the screen down there and hold it, you'll see that every one of those lines is straight. So this is the world we live in, friends. Yes, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your service and continued service to the country. I'm one of these people, and have been for a while, that I truly believe that the incumbents that we have in both houses, I just don't see how we keep losing so much when we own both houses and the executive branch. Even if they were to, and I truly hope that you do get redeputized, either way, if they wind up taking a look into this, with the judges that we currently have, and since they have the lifetime appointments, do you see any resolution coming to any of this as far as interference on behalf of the Islamic societies and groups like CARE and so forth? Thank you, sir.
Can you imagine if I wasn't an optimistic person, how in the world would I have survived all this already? The whole thing is preposterously impossible. All of it. Investigated 9 times. I could have hit the wall on subsection 3-A.5C 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it would have been over. I just made that up. There's no really such law. The point is, some fine point of law could have crashed me at any time. So I'm certainly not going to try to second guess the process now and give up on it, because none of this was done by my own wisdom or strength anyway. The only thing I did was stood for what I know irrefutably is right and true, and now, as time goes on, being proven more clearly than ever. And I will make packages of this cache of information, this archive, and literally take it and give it to them. But I can't make them respond to it, but I can do my part, and I will. That's my intention.
Good deal. Thank you, sir.
You mentioned how helpful Judicial Watch has been. How about Jay Sekulow?
Well, the first time I talked to Jay Sekulow, I was still active duty, and he told me in order for them to take the case, I'd have to go public. So that boxed that right there, because I wasn't ready to go public at the time, and now everything else is happening, you know, the rest of the subsequent sequence of events, and I'm not really at a point where I'm seeking remedy through the legal process right now. My remedy is to get redeputized. If I go the legal way, I'm going to be seen as an opportunist or an adversary. I'd rather reserve that. I am less confident about a legal remedy, meaning a solution, than any of the rest of the approaches of all of them. And I would rather be able to solve it by going back in and actually picking up where we left off and bring some of this. Because, by the way, it all still exists.
I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I want to most importantly thank Phil Haney for taking the time out of his trip out to California to visit with us and share his thoughts. So please give Phil a great round of applause.